In a world where AI is making us more and more efficient and giving us way more superpowers, what's going to be that thing that actually makes you special and the thing that gives you an unfair advantage or an alpha? And in this conversation, we go into why that thing is really your ability to spend your time intentionally and wisely. This entire conversation is all about how can I figure out where the highest leverage points are for me to be as impactful as possible.
Yeah, our guest was Hilary Gridley. Hilary runs the core product at Whoop, a beloved consumer product. She also teaches a course in Maven to help managers be way more efficient with AI. And before that, she was a product leader at Big Health, and where she also did some growth work. And then before that, she was a product marketing manager at Dropbox. If you're a product manager who wants to get a peek of what a great manager looks like, this episode is going to be really interesting. So without further ado, enjoy.
All right, we're live. Hilary, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the stuff you've been putting out there. And for those who haven't listened to Hilary's recent episode with Claire Vo on How AI, I think it was an awesome dive into how to really empower teams to use GPTs, and especially as a manager. So we're not going to cover any of that ground in this conversation because it was super well covered there. But when we were thinking about what we wanted to talk about today, one of the topics that I think got all three of us super excited is around, let's call it the right times to use AI and maybe times when maybe AI should not be relied on in some ways. And Hilary, you were saying something like, just because AI can be used for something doesn't mean it should. And so I wanted to start the conversation there. Can you say more on maybe where you're seeing AI being applied where perhaps it shouldn't, or it has some dangers of being applied?
Happy to. I think it's something that's been really interesting for me as I've been exploring these tools is I think it has made me hyper aware of how, like, any given task that I'm doing, how helpful is it for me to do that task versus have a robot do it for me. And sometimes that's like a time savings thing. I need to get something done and I don't want to spend a lot of time doing something tedious. And other times it's like it has made me reflect on the value I get from doing something that actually seems very tedious. And just to sort of like give an example that's not specific to AI first, I think about this with writing a lot. Like, writing is something that is a very tedious and difficult process to go through, but you fight through it because you get out on the other end with clarity. Hopefully, if you're lucky, if the gods bless you that day. And I think about all the time that I have spent working on like a slide deck for some presentation, and then the presentation gets moved or doesn't even happen. And you're like, well, that was such a waste of time. But it's often not a waste of time, even if the artifact itself that you're working on or the thing, like the objective that you have, doesn't quite play out the way that you want. If it gets you to a place of better clarity and it gets you to like a better level of understanding by the end of it, which is, of course, what makes something like working on a slide deck so hard, is that you often go into it being like, I only kind of know what I want to say. I only kind of know what point I'm trying to make and how to do that most compellingly. You have to like fight it out, and it can be hard. And it's especially hard when you're doing this in a group and everybody's coming from a different place and you're all like battling with each other to try to figure out like, what is the thing that we collectively believe to be the right answer here? And so I have seen this in myself. I've seen it with other people. Like, you spend all this time trying to figure that out. You get to the answer and then something changes and you don't even end up giving the presentation and everyone's sad because you spent all this time doing it. And I think like I apply that lens to everything now, where I'm like, is this a good use of my brain power and a good use of my time? Because I have this option that I never had before, which is a robot will do it for me. And I think there are things that like I find tremendously valuable. Like, I'm a huge proponent of taking notes in meetings. I take notes by hand, especially for really important meetings. And people are always like, why don't you just use an AI transcriber to do that? And I'm like, because this is how I'm processing. This is how I'm learning. This is how I'm getting to clarity. And some of that is maybe just how my brain works. Some of it is maybe universally true in some way. I don't know. But that's how I've been thinking about it, is like parts of writing, parts of thinking where you can outsource it. Like, when is that a good idea and when is it not? It's probably pretty context specific and like person specific. But I worry that people are way too quick to just say, oh, a robot can do this for me, and therefore this is great because it has saved me some time. But like time is not the only thing that matters, especially if you care about doing good work and you care about like really doing an excellent job at whatever you're doing. Sometimes you do have to invest time in ways that feel wasted or at least like crazy in the moment because they get you to a place of clarity.
Yeah, what's coming to mind for me is I remember hearing someone say that the most valuable part of applying to Y Combinator is applying to Y Combinator, and the process that just forces teams to sit down and like basically answer all those questions, even if they don't get in. Like
100%.
the exercise of going through that is so helpful. That's,
I hear this about grad school applications that I think that's like 100% right. And we just never get the time for that in our life. We're always like running from one thing to the other. We all have these spaghetti brains of just trying to get stuff out the door. And the ability to sit and think and do that in a really reflective way is such a luxury. And so it's amazing to me how willing people are to just give that up. When I'm like, the more stuff we start outsourcing and the more we try to just say, I don't want to think about this. I don't want to think about this. I just want to get it done. That's not the world that I really want to live in. Like, when I think about what I want to free up time for, to the extent that I care about freeing up time using AI, it is to do more like deeper thinking and deeper reflection. It's certainly not to live in like a more spaghetti brained world where all of that has been outsourced and now I'm just like running around doing more and more things. I totally agree with that.
How do you think about like what's like high leverage and still worth doing versus what's maybe something that has to be done, but it doesn't matter how, maybe if it's like super well thought out or strategic, like kind of like a scale type of thing? And has your like framing or the way you think about it change as maybe models get better? Like how have you thought about that?
Yeah, it is interesting because it does change. It used to be so much more driven by what the models can do. And more it's not driven by that anymore because the models can do anything better. I think a couple of things. Like one, I have started thinking about anything that I'm doing in a way more broken down way than I was before. So even over the course of X project I'm working on, I don't think about whatever it might be, like writing a PRD. I don't think about that as one task. I think about that as about 30 different tasks. And that's everything from figuring out why we're doing this to the actual scoping of it, to the actual drafting of it, the copy editing of it, the socialization of it, the political battles that I'm going to have to fight about. Like every single one of those is so different and equally important. And I think each of those has a different balance of like the degree to which AI can help, the ways that AI can help. So whether it's more of a time savings thing versus more of a making you better at it thing, and also like my own unique strengths. And so something I think a lot about is we are in this like kind of uncertain world of what are jobs turning into? What are any of our jobs going to look like in the next 5-10 years? Something that seems like a pretty safe bet to me, although it's always risky to say that, is if you have any kind of like unique intellectual strength or insight or perspective, making sure that you are making that really strong, because that plus super intelligence makes that like 100x what anyone else can do. And so that's how I think about it. I can give some examples, but it's like, for any given task, like how do I break that down into all of the subcomponents of it, which by the way, is itself a thing that I ask AI for help for. Like I will tell it what I'm trying to do and I will say, break this down into all the different subcomponents of it. I built a GPT that can do this. And then I'm thinking like, yes, for each of these pieces, how much of my thinking is actually key to this being excellent versus just anyone could do this and it would be fine. And if anyone could do this and it'd be fine, then it'd be like, let's let the robot do it. How much of this is key to my own advancing of my understanding of something? So I think about something like reading like customer service tickets that are coming in, reading survey responses, things like that are like very easy to automate and synthesize, but it is like helping me always sharpen my mental model of what is going on with our product if I'm doing that myself, at least occasionally, not every single time. And I think, yeah, that's like how I'm thinking about it. Like, what am I getting out of this? And also, what am I putting into it that is unique? And then everything else automated.
Yeah, Ben, I don't know what you're thinking, but I think it actually might be fun to break down like maybe like the PRD example and go through a couple of those things, just like to make it more concrete. But I'm curious, Ben, if you're going to go a different direction.
What I was picturing is that as Hilary's talking, it's almost like you're applying the same muscle that makes you a good product person in general, which is the ability to break something down into its component pieces and figure out like the leverage points to get some kind of outcome. You're applying that to your own thinking and your own process for creating artifacts and creating things that you do with other people. And that's actually one way I've been similarly using AI. So I think that the meta point that you're making is probably the more interesting to me than like a PRD example in particular, because I think it's extremely insightful. And I think a lot of people would benefit from doing more of what you're describing. Because I think what we've talked about at the beginning is how there's not that much being said in the public square right now about how to use AI to think better. And I think we have an opportunity to talk about that. And so just to double click, I'm imagining maybe you go for a walk with ChatGPT voice mode or something, and you're talking to it and you're like, there's this thing that I care about that I want to start doing. Here's a bunch of context. If you wanted to achieve this kind of outcome at the end, what would be the high level steps? Like, what are the key steps in the process from where I start to how I get there? And then you also nudge it to give you in each step of that way, what are examples of specific tasks that would need to happen? And then could you score them on like how high leverage are they? Like how strategically important are they to get the outcome? How delegatable are they? But then also how much insight is to be gathered if I don't delegate them? So like almost it's something like that is what the algorithm I was hearing in your head. Is that, would you tweak anything about that or build on it?
I think that's right. I think about that like in general, that sort of like problem framing step of any work that you're doing and zooming out to be like, okay, what am I actually trying to do here? What might I be missing? What are like the obvious traps that I'm going to step in along the way, especially if it's something that I don't have a high degree of like context or I've never done before, and trying to like load up all that information at the top is something that I would normally do pre-robot era. I would be doing that anyway. And now I can do that much faster and supercharge it, make it much better, challenge my thinking constantly. I feel like that's the thing I'm doing all the time, is trying to get the robot to challenge my thinking, which is funny because it usually wants to agree with me. And I do think they're getting better about not being quite everything is a great idea. Great. You're so smart, Hilary. Wonderful. But that's definitely part of it. And then, yeah, I think I'm doing a lot of what you're saying in my head. But I think another interesting thing here is a lot of the things that I am able to do in my head, it's because I had to at one point learn the hard way and go through all of this. And I think now that like people have the robot available to them, like you can do that much earlier. Like you can, to your point, like externalize some of these mental calculus type things that people who have a lot of experience and a lot of judgment are doing, and just ask the robot to do it for you. So I think that's exactly right. And I think the other piece of that's like mental calculus that I'm doing is it, much like your point around like you doing this like a product person, I'm always thinking of almost the attributes of competition, basically, of like if you're looking at any kind of product and you're like, okay, what are the attributes that our product needs to be better than the competition at? What are the things that our product can be like equally good? And what are the like table stakes that need to be there? And what are the areas that other products are maybe like overshooting? And we can actually invest less in that area because we have some insight here that by investing less there and investing more somewhere else, that will give us an unfair advantage that we don't think our competitors see. And I think I have a similar mental framework for how I'm thinking about in any given situation, like what is the unique advantage that will come from me thinking about this versus a robot? And where is that high? Like when it's higher, I'm thinking about it. And when it's lower, the robot's thinking about it.
Do you keep that in writing? By any chance of like your assessment of that competitor analysis of human versus robot? And is that, and and how often do you update it and you go back and check in and be like, hey, like, how is this changing?
No, I haven't really thought about it until right now that that's what is going on in my head, but I could.
Do you trust a robot to try, let's say like you wake up, Hilary, and you've got this to-do list that's, let's say like the easy, quick things to do are not on there, but it's 3 big strategic things that you're like, I need to really give these things some time to think about them. Do you trust the robot today to help you decide which of those things is the highest priority bucket to put your brain energy into, or do you still not trust it to help you with that part?
I 100% trust it, but I don't trust anyone to make decisions for me, but I trust a ton of people to help me make better decisions. And so I would never take what the robot tells me face value as just time to turn off my brain and do that. But much in the same way that I might discuss it with somebody whose opinion I really value, or somebody whose judgment I think is really sharp. And then I put on my own layer of like, is that right? Yes. Okay, move forward. It is much easier for me to say to a robot, like, okay, I have these 3 things I need to do today. My criteria for how I would think about the most important ones are X, Y, and Z. Can you score each of these based on some context, and put together a plan for me to prioritize based on that? How much time I should spend on each of these, what order I should do them in, whatever, and explain your rationale to me in a way that is like falsifiable by me, so that I can tell that I either agree or disagree with this rationale that you're giving me. And it does that in about 10 seconds. And I look at it and I go, yeah, that seems right. Moving forward.
What if you didn't yet have those variables or those like levers clearly in your mind for like how to decide what
I would ask them to me.
So you'd be like, here's 3 things that I'm thinking about spending my time on. I have a limited amount of time, so I'll probably only be able to get to one of these fully today.
Yeah.
And how do you go from that to it helping you figure out what the considerations should be, or like the variables should be for which one is the highest leverage for you?
Yeah, I think about this as what I was saying earlier, where you just have to keep breaking the task down. And so if I'm not far enough along on that, then there's like a step that needs to happen first. And either I already have some kind of success criteria in my mind, or some sort of decision criteria in my mind for any decision I have to make. Or if I don't, then I need to get that. And I do think this is something the models are getting increasingly, like stunningly good at, is if you simply start by saying, I need to make this decision. Can you first recommend how I should make the decision? See what it says. Be like, do I buy that? Yeah, most of the time it seems right. Okay, now based on that, tell me what decision is best and explain your reasoning. I'm always making sure I'm asking it. Explain your reasoning in a way that I can decide if I agree or not. And so I'm going up to the point that I don't have clarity. And then I'm taking a step back and saying, can you help me get clarity on the next step? And then I'm moving forward. And at each of those steps, I'm checking to say, do I agree with this? And again, I also will say it totally depends on how high stakes the decision is, right? There's so much context here, and any of these can be taken if you take it to its logical conclusion, it will seem insane. If you start doing this for every single decision, like that's way too much work. And so this gets to developing that intuition for what is high leverage versus low leverage. If it's like, I'm getting out of a meeting and I have 30 minutes to do something before my next meeting, no, it doesn't make sense for me to have a 10-minute conversation with the robot where we're setting success criteria for what the next 30 minutes of my life are going to look like. But if it's a big decision, it's worth it.
How do you think about giving the robot enough context? Because that's something that I always really struggle with. What is the right amount? And I always worry like, did I give it enough context to actually be helpful and have all the data points? But sometimes I'm like, I don't want to waste too much time giving context. So how do you find like a good balance there?
Yeah, I think I'm like anyone, I get impatient about it. And so there's a couple of fail modes that I am also like, the robot doesn't work for me 100% of the time. And I get a lot of questions from people that are like, what happens when you start trying to get it to do a thing and it's just not giving you a helpful answer? And I'm like, I quit. I'm like, okay, screw this. I'm going to go try something else. And so I would say there are definitely certain things where I'm like hoping it's going to help me. And then it seems to be missing some level of context that it needs. And I realize for me to actually give it that context, it's going to be just as much work for me to just go do the thing myself. If I'm trying to talk to it about, I don't know, like some ideas for how we're going to improve some feature, and all of the ideas it's giving me, I'm like, it doesn't really understand what we're trying to do with this feature. And it clearly doesn't understand the feedback we're getting on it. And I'm like, I'm not going to go find all that information and feed it to at this point, robot's not there yet. I'm going to do this myself. And then it's just cut my losses as soon as I can, because my least favorite activity is being 20 minutes deep in a ChatGPT conversation and just fighting with a robot and getting absolutely nowhere. So when that happens, then I'm just like, all right, didn't work this time. That's okay.
One thing I've been finding success with context is, so started in ChatGPT, then I went through a big Claude phase because I loved projects, and then ChatGPT introduced projects, and then like voice mode and memory. So now I've been back in, like if I just need transactional help with drafting a message or a LinkedIn post or something like that, Claude's great for that for me. But when it comes to like thought partnership, I don't trust Claude for thought partnership. I actually trust ChatGPT more because of voice mode, and that I can go walk around the park, talk to it. And the reason to tie this to context is because when I think about Claude, I have to figure out which project I'm going to start the chat in because I need to know where the context is available for that specific thing. But with ChatGPT, I've been starting so many like brand new chats that are not inside of projects because it has memory that is cross chat. And so I can basically just start a new chat and be like, hey, you remember I was telling you thinking about like this upcoming podcast I want to do with Marc? What do you remember about that? And it will literally like tell me what it remembers in a brand new chat about that. And so the starting point for every conversation is much richer in context. And so for me, that's been really helpful. And actually it's locking me in more and more to ChatGPT's ecosystem because it has more and more of a body of memory about me. And I think that the moment in which I go to that is, you know, the concept of like zone of proximal development when it comes to personal growth and learning. It's basically this, I forget who came up with the concept, but I think the zone of proximal development is the place where you're most likely to feel a sense of flow and deep engagement in what you're doing because you're right on the edge of, I know exactly what I'm doing, but also I have no idea how to do this thing I'm about to try. And so for me, like I find that I go to ChatGPT to think through things when I'm in that zone of proximal development where I'm like, I know just enough to kind of tee it up. And then I'm like, I'm really still, it's like clay where I go from there. I don't know if that's how the two of you are thinking about it too, but I try to give it basically all the context I can to get it to that launch point.
It's so interesting you say that because it makes me realize too that there's like much in the same way that I'm doing this weird internal calculus around things that might feel like a waste of time in service of getting some deliverable done, but are a good use of time because I'm investing in my ability to do a skill easier in the future. I am realizing that like maybe implicitly I've started doing that with some of these tools as well, where my calculus of what is a waste of time to bother talking to the AI about is like changing because, to your point, if it's going to remember it, then it's not just in service of this conversation. It's in service of every conversation that I will ever want to refer back to that this is going to be relevant to. And that's a huge unlock. That's a stunningly huge unlock. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, something that I do that's really helpful for context is at the end of each prompt when I'm about to kick off like some decision or thinking, I'm like, hey, please ask me clarifying questions or ask for context that you need, one question at a time, and stop asking me questions when you start to feel like you're getting diminishing returns.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, it always asks you in like 5 to 10 questions. And as you were saying, Hilary, like just the fact that sometimes it asks me questions that I didn't think about, like that whole process is already worth it. And then I also invest in this thing that now it has the context that I can go back and ask and start other conversations. So there's some double value there as well, which I really like.
Yeah, I do that. And I also I try to get as far as I can without giving it context, because I think it, especially as the models get smarter, depending on the situation, I find that they just need it less and less. And a lot of times if I say, use your best judgment about what you would guess the context here is based on what I'm asking you, it does a pretty good job. And then if it doesn't, then I will be like, okay, now do something, like ask me these questions and I'll answer them. Because I'll say, ask me some follow-up questions, and then it'll do that. And then I get lazy and I'm like, I don't really feel like answering all these questions. And I'll say, just tell me what you think the answers are. And then it'll say them. And I'm like, okay, this one's right. This one's right. This one I need to go a little deeper on. So it's so fun to play with it and just see what works, what doesn't, and then adjust from there.
Yeah, I think that's like the other benefit of these like reasoning models too, that they're pretty transparent about how they think. There's like some implicit trust that you start building when you see, okay, like here's how they're thinking, right? And you can very quickly see, okay, they're going on the wrong rabbit hole here. Yeah, so maybe I'm not going to trust it. When you're like, oh, like you're breaking it down in the way that maybe I would, then I'm like, okay, cool. I feel like I can trust you and this output will be decent, basically.
Which, by the way, is just like management, right? Like when you're managing someone, the degree to which you are trying to get them to help you understand their thought process. Because if you feel confident in their thought process, like you can just let them run. You're trying to catch the things early on that are like they haven't taken in they don't understand a constraint, or they don't know about a constraint, or they don't know about some other area of input that they need to go talk to this person on this team because they're working on something similar, or they've done this before. And you don't know what they don't know. So you have to like work with them a little bit to be like, how are you going to solve this problem? What information are you going to use? Who are you going to talk to? What are you going to go read? Where are you going to do your research? And if you feel confident in that and you trust this person, you can feel confident they're going to get to the right answer. And I think a lot of problems with management stem from people not doing that enough early. And they don't do that kind of alignment. And then they get to the end of the project and they're like, we disagree about the answer. And then you waste all this time fighting with your direct report, being like, well, you really should have done X, Y, and Z. And it's frustrating for them. It's frustrating for you. That is wasted time, I think. And it's like doing the exact same thing with a robot, is like, before you go do too deep down this, tell me how you're going to try to solve this. What kind of context do you already have? What context can you intuit? What do you really need from me? And just if you get all that lined up, like, it's amazing what it can do.
The OG human in the loop, basically.
Yeah. It is so funny to me how much just like the skill of management is the skill of talking to GPTs. And I'm not the first to say it. I'm probably the billionth to say it. But every day I find it more and more true.
If you're enjoying this conversation, please check out the links in the show notes to support the podcast. Marc and I do this out of love, but to keep it going, we also need your support. Thanks, and now back to the episode. Are there any things that you're finding that you have more time for, or any things that you're trying to make more time for by leveraging these tools? Like, did you used to find yourself maybe wishing you had more time to think, and now you feel like you do? I'm just curious what the biggest kind of like unlocks maybe for you are these days as you lean in.
Yeah, it's interesting because time is so slippery, right? You're like, oh, you get more time back and then more stuff fills it. And you're like, wait, what did I do with all these time savings? And I have a sort of a random aside on this that I will come back and answer your question. But I've been thinking about this a lot because like this idea of taste has been trending. Everyone's talking about, you got to have taste. What's taste? And to me, I have a very simple definition for it, which is taste is basically the intersection of perfectionism with a deep understanding of opportunity cost. And so if you can get that balance, right? If you are somebody who obsesses over making everything perfect, but only the things that really matter, and only up until the point where that time is not spent better doing something else, that's how you're going to create the best version of anything. And I think the failure modes with that on the perfectionism side are, on one side, you have people who they just set like a kind of arbitrarily high bar for everything. And they're like, everything has to be perfect. Nothing can ever be subpar in any way. And I don't consider that having good taste, because it's the discernment between those things that's the hard part. Like, it's not hard to say everything has to be perfect all the time. And separately, on the other side of that, like the other failure mode for perfectionism is you get so obsessed with one thing that you spend way too long making it perfect when there's all these other things that matter just as much, if not more. And you are not allocating your time well across those things, or your energy well, or worse, like your designer's time, whoever it is. Because again, like you haven't found the right intersection between the opportunity cost side of you and the perfectionism side of you. Obviously, there's a lot of failure modes that just, you're not anywhere close to perfectionist at all. And you're just too obsessed with saving time and not meeting that high bar.
I think what came to mind to me is like the diminishing marginal utility concept. Exactly. As you're talking. It's like trying to find, like, be a perfectionist about the things that, until the point of diminishing marginal like value, where getting it from 90% to 100% has like a 5% marginal benefit. So who cares, right? Mm-hmm. But getting to 90% of your perfectionism is actually going to have 100% of the value, then that's actually, maybe that's the bar, because 85% will only be 50% of the value, and that's not good enough, right?
100%. And it's really hard to know where those lines are. And that's what makes taste hard, is knowing when you've hit that, for what, under what circumstances, given all of the other things that you could be doing with that time. So to answer your question around what do I do with the time, I think about that a lot. Like, it's less for me, I have all this time that I can now like fill with other stuff, and all this stuff that I wanted to do before. And it's more that I can just be like increasingly precise about how I am spending my time on different attributes of things that really matter more or less. And I mentioned earlier, I do tend to think about like breaking any kind of task down into lots of smaller pieces of it. And so in some ways, I'm spending more time on a certain thing that maybe if I'm writing, I don't know, like a strategy memo or whatever, there are pieces of that I'm spending way more time on within that because I'm like really trying to isolate the kernel of what it is that I want to say. And then once I got it, I'm okay, the rest of this can write itself. I hit go and it drafts and I'm like, done. And it feels authentic to me. It feels unique. It feels insightful. But I didn't have to spend all that time like drafting out. It's like when you're watching a comedy sketch and you get the joke and then it plays out a little too long and you're like, I got that in the first 30 seconds. We didn't have to do the whole 5-minute sketch about it.
Like a book that could have been a blog post kind of thing. Yeah.
Exactly. And so for me, I feel like it's less, I'm doing so much more customer research now, or I'm doing so much more like prototyping now or whatever it is. It's like within anything that I'm doing, I think I'm able to make it much better because more of the time of doing that thing is going to the parts of it that really matter, because less of it is going to like the moving pixels around my slide deck or whatever, the stuff that was like, I was never bringing anything unique to that.
Yeah. Your definition of taste is, it's like one of the most interesting ones I've heard ever. And yeah, it aligns with how I think about what the most impactful like knowledge worker or PM or whatever will look like. I think they're probably the most important skill set that they need to master is like that time allocation. And assuming that you're going to continue to get infinite leverage with AI, or at least like a lot of leverage through AI as things get better. But just having that really good taste of what to use that time for is super important. Selfishly, I'm trying to get better at that. So I'm curious, like, how do you think about that? An easier way to ask about it is like, how would you teach someone to become a better time allocator?
Can you give me an example of something that you're like where do you feel like you waste your time? Or where does where time go that you're like, I got to get better at this?
Yeah. Let me see.
For you, knowing you, go ahead.
I'm curious. Yeah, here's what you're gonna say.
I was gonna say, knowing you, I think you're constantly torn between operational, tactical, like day-to-day, keep things moving and make things better versus expand and do like larger, more strategic moves that maybe can create more leverage for you. That's one thing I know that you think about, but I don't know if that's relevant.
Yeah, I think that's a good example.
Between those two things, like which one do you feel is closer to your superpower?
Probably I really enjoy being in the operations, getting things done and making things better.
Do you think you do that better than most people?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Then that's what I would like. That's what I'm trying to do, I think, is expand the time I spend on things that I'm better at than most people and diminish the things that are like, I've got to do this either because the table stakes of it, sometimes you got to take out the trash, or because there's like some part of it that is important to the work that like I think I'm better at and it feeds into it in some way, but I'm not going to get more utility from expanding this thing that I just feel like I should be doing.
Yeah, there's almost like you need to keep in mind your ikigai almost, or like what your superpower on top of like maybe what the world needs or what the world values, and then maybe like then adding the component of what can you get from AI basically.
Yeah, if it's your superpower and it has, not to put it in like super capitalist terms, but if it's not going to get you anywhere, like it's not providing any kind of value to your job.
Alpha,
there's no alpha. There you go. Thank you. Then, yeah, I don't know that you're going to get a lot of leverage from investing in that. But I think I said this earlier, but I do think that if you're trying to position yourself well in a kind of AI world where things are getting shaken up and it's just like kind of middle of any talent pool is just falling out, where the bottom of any talent pool is basically rising to the average because you can use robots to do it. The middle of the pool is like either reverting to the mean or not necessarily something that there's a ton of use for in a typical company now. And then you have the top of the talent pool I would say there's the top of the talent pool that is not using AI and is just staying right at what the top of the talent pool is today. And then there's the top of the talent pool that is using AI. And so they're taking these things that they have an unfair advantage at and figuring out how to become like 100x better at it using these tools that are available to them. And they're just like shooting up. And so I think what's going to happen is if you think about the average talent expectations for anything are increasing because the bottom is increasing and the people at the top are increasing, but it's still going to be super stratified. And I think this is true in creative industries. I think this is true anywhere. If you are in the top 1% of anything, you're gonna have an okay time, hopefully a good time. And so
just don't get complacent.
Yeah.
I think if you're a top 1%, you got to keep going.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I think a lot of what we consider the middle of the talent, like expectations today, is going to continue rising to what we now think of as like the top 1%. And so if you're the top 1% today, that's going to become more and more average unless you're figuring out how to just get maximum leverage from that.
Do you actually, Hilary, expect the PMs on your team to, on what dimension would you expect them to be like 10x better or 10x more something today than you did 3 years ago? Because I think the lazy answer in my head is like 10x output, right? Or 10x impact. Like that, it kind of feels a little hand wavy to say it. But is there anything concrete that you've landed on that feels pretty solid in your mind at this point for what are things that I would expect them to be 10x now than they were 3 years ago?
I don't know if I'm quite at 10x for things. I think maybe some things in terms of speed, like something like writing a PRD, like things that used to be just like you'd have to spend, I don't know, a couple days writing a PRD, and now you can bang it out, hopefully. But in terms of like core attributes or skills, I think to me, because we're still fairly early in this, I'm looking much more at like pace of change than I am at like level of change.
So it's like the slope almost is what you're looking at more.
Yeah, and it's the slope applied in the right places. And I think to my point earlier, like the right places are super person dependent. And if I was like, there's one thing that I hope that people who have ever worked for me would come out the other side of it saying, I hope it is that they have a better sense of what their superpowers are and can like articulate that very clearly and feel like they have been able to hone those working for me. And so I think helping them understand that and then seeing the way that they're using some of these new tools to really put that on like a hyper growth trajectory. And it's got to be something about you, but it's also got to be something about the situation you're in and the company that you're in. And you could have one amazing superpower that it just does not help in a role that you're in or in a company that you're in which case, like, that's not going to work. But yeah, that's kind of how I think about it.
Marc, I'm curious what you're going to ask, but one thing that you and I, Marc, have talked about in recent episodes, and I'm curious to get Hilary's quick take on it, is like, what's your general philosophy on weakness and like working on weaknesses and focusing time on those?
You know, it's funny. I was actually thinking about this when you were asking about how I think about what I should use AI for and what I shouldn't. I think I'm somebody who like naturally just tends to follow my interests and my passions. And so I think the answer that I would give you that would be not totally true is, oh, this is great because I can use AI to shore up some of my weaknesses. And I've thought about this a lot. I'm not really great at getting back to emails. And so I'm like, I should probably set up a workflow that's like, I mean, my inbox is a disaster. And every time I see one of these tools that's like, we're going to help you get to inbox 0, I'm like, I need that. And I'm aware of the fact that there are a ton of AI tools out there that could probably help me do it. And it would probably make me better, certainly to other people. I think it would probably make my life better in a lot of ways because I have a lot of stress about how bad I am at this, but I haven't done it. And so it's one of those weird things. I think a lot about behavioral psychology. I work at Whoop. It's like we're very focused on behavior change and how you get people to actually do hard things, and especially things that they have said they want to do, exercise more, sleep better, but that they are not actually doing. And so I think about this for myself all the time, where I'm like, yes, if somebody were to ask me if this would be a good opportunity for me to shore up my weaknesses using some of these tools available to me, I would say 100%. But the honest answer is I'm not really doing it. So take that however you will.
Go ahead, Marc. Sorry. I feel like I interrupted you earlier.
No, I'm glad you asked that. I was also curious about that. Yeah, I think what I love about these advice is that it's just different of just focusing more on your strengths. It's different that like the conventional wisdom or advice out there of like, oh, like you should be spending your time on like strategy or user research, right? That's like the really thing that matters. And I'm sure like a lot of those things are table stakes and you have to do a little bit of it to be a good PM. But I really like the fact that of like just spending the time to really, or work with someone that can really highlight, hey, here are your strengths. And then once you find them, like, how do you actually amplify your impact through maybe AI and helping you do that? And I'm curious, like, if some managers are listening to this conversation, like how would you go from the point of, hey, I've identified, I have this PM who's really strong. Let's, for the example, let's say user discovery. Like then how would you go about help them amplify that strength with AI?
Two things. One, I want to answer something you didn't ask a question. So I'm answering a fake question that you made me think about earlier, and then I'll answer this question. You were mentioning there's like certain things that just are table stakes for PMs. I think that is an important part. Again, going back to this idea of like the sort of like attributes of competition and where you need to be outperforming the competition, where you need to be meeting them, and where you can't be failing them in some way. I think it's the same thing with weaknesses, where if you're lucky, most of your weaknesses, like if you can get them up to that table stakes level, you're fine. You never want a weakness to become a liability. And as soon as that happens, then you do need to like reallocate, shore that up. Much like with a product, like it's totally fine if your product has flaws. It's just not fine if those flaws are things that your customers really care about, right? Or if the flaw is so bad that it renders it unusable in some way, right? If you think about a person who's so insightful but is a total asshole, or terrible at communication, like to me, a terrible communicator renders all of the other skills useless. So it does not matter how good those other skills are if they can't communicate them. And so in that world, yeah, like again, I'm always thinking about where are we on here? If we're down here, kind of weakness, and it's a problem, we have to fix that. If it's just, this is a weakness, that's fine, especially if it is outweighed by the alpha you get from a strength that you have, which I think in the case of a lot of people, it is. So that's
like doing pixel perfect Figma designs is an example of something that a PM might be terrible at. I'm really bad at Figma. And it's like, yeah, but no one cares.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So don't worry about that.
Yeah, and like probably don't go get a job where that would be an important attribute of success for whatever reason. And there are plenty of jobs where it's not. So like go get one of those jobs. To your other question around, okay, so what do you do when you have identified the superpower? A lot of it is historically, I would just be having conversations with people. So ask them, like, what do you think your superpowers are? How do you define them? Here's what I've observed. Here's what I've heard from other people. There's a couple tools. There's like a SY Partners has a superpower app that I really like. It's like costs $3, but it's good. Because I think the first step in this is just like helping people get the vocabulary to talk about these things. I think a lot of people have a vague sense of, I think I'm pretty good at this thing. I don't really know how to talk about it. And especially junior people are maybe like, I think when you're really good at something, you tend to assume that everyone can do that thing, like, because it feels so natural to you. And so there's a level of like, you need to convince them that actually the way they are approaching it is meaningfully different from other people. And it's very valuable, and give them the vocabulary to talk about that. And that's the reason I like that SY Partners app. If you search SY Partners Superpower in the App Store, you will find it, is because it asks you these questions and then gives you the vocabulary to talk about it. So once I've done that, then pre-robot era, I would be just asking them like, what are some opportunities that we could think of to get you flexing this more? Are there opportunities here at the company? Are there external opportunities? Are there like speaking events that we could be getting you talking about this? Like whatever it might be, just trying to build the confidence and also literally get them opportunities to work on it. But I think in the post-robot era or the during robot era, what I really bringing like the robot into these conversations to be like, let's ask. And so I've had conversations with people on my team where we have Claude or whomever up in front of us. And I'm like, let me tell you about this person on my team. And I'm like, we're literally sitting next to each other and I'm typing. And I'm like, I think she's really excellent at A, B, and C. She's really passionate about X, Y, and Z. Here's a little bit about her job. Can you come up with 20 ways that we could like sharpen that skill? And then it'll turn some stuff out. And usually I'll have to do my favorite prompt, which is be 100 times more specific. And it will do that. And then I can try to like pattern match of, here are some like areas, here are some things going on at the company. Is there anything like, can you bring,
what's the Venn diagram overlap between what this person's really good at, what would help them grow professionally and be fun for them, but also lines up with a business need or
100%.
something
Impact.
that the company needs. Yeah. And that's like a recipe for making that impact.
100%. And another sort of spec that I like to give it is, because there's nothing, I shouldn't say worse, there are worse things than this, but when you come out of a professional development conversation and you're already like booked and busy because you're a competent person and you're in demand, and then suddenly you get handed a list of like fun new growth initiatives for you to take on. And you're, God, now I gotta be responsible for this. And so sometimes I will say stack rank these ideas based on what is like highest leverage for the time it requires, or even what is the least amount of time. What are things that are like discrete time commitments as opposed to, oh, I just signed up to do this new newsletter that I now have to send out to the company every single week for the rest of time. And so like thinking about that element of it too, of like, how am I getting the most bang for my buck on these types of things? Because there's so many things you could do. When you're having these conversations, you're often in the like optional space. And so the only way you're ever going to get something optional prioritized is if you make sure that like the return on investment of it is as high as it possibly can be.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think, so one thing we've talked about also on the podcast, and I just think about this a lot in general, is incentives. And I truly believe like at a human psychology level, and I'm sure you all think about it a lot with like how people use your product and how to get them to do certain things that are good for them, that you have to understand incentives. So I'm curious, do you think that the way that product managers are incentivized to spend their time or make impact is changing at all given these new tools being available? Or do you think the goals and the ways they're being measured are basically the same and probably going to continue to be unchanged? It's just like the how they get there that's changing. But I'm just curious if you're seeing anything in the management world about this.
It's interesting. I think it is changing. I have not seen any kind of consensus. Like I don't have a very strong point of view right now on how we should be measuring success or evaluating success in like how these jobs are changing. And I think any way that we try to put a line in the sand, 4 months from now, I would have a completely different opinion. So I think, yes, I think, again, me personally, I would say the way a person thinks about how they use their time, like their prioritization, basically, has always been a really important skill for PMs. And I think that is going to become more and more important because the rules of what takes how much time and how much value you can get from that, especially when you're pulling in engineers, designers, all these other people and trying to do those equations, all of that math is radically changing. And I do think there's you can have a pretty unfair advantage if you are on the cutting edge of that, because you're going to be able to get so much more out of people than you ever were before. So I think that's part of it. And then I also think something that we've been thinking a lot about here is, and it's so context dependent is the other thing I should say. Like all of this stuff totally depends on like the problems that a company faces and what you need to succeed in that company, who the personalities are, like what the challenges are. So I'll just say that. But like, if you're at a company where there are so many different directions that you could go, it's very like challenging thing has always been, how do you make the right decision about the problem areas that you invest in, like the opportunities areas that you invest in, and then also like the solutions to those problems. And historically, this has been a high stakes decision, because if you choose an opportunity or a problem, like you're like, we're going to go try to do whatever thing. If you work at a SaaS company and you're like, okay, we're going to go try to do, I'm trying to think of a good example now. I always run into problems when I do this because I like want to give a Whoop example and then I'm like, I'm going to get in trouble if I say that.
We're gonna focus on free to paid trial conversion, something like that. Is that an example of what you mean? Like picking an area?
I would say like when I was at Dropbox, we were trying to think about for the consumer SKU, like what is the area? We have a lot of people who are just storing their like various life stuff in Dropbox. And we want to like create new ways for consumers in a non-work environment to be working together better, doing things better together in Dropbox. So what does that look like? Maybe that has to do with photo sharing and the way that people are like working with photos. Maybe that has to do with like how people are running their household and all of the like documents associated with that. Maybe that has to do with like creative projects or freelancers or people who are like, this was when I was there, it was like the dawn of selling digital stuff online. And so maybe there's just like all these different like theories you could have for what is the problem that we want to solve, that we think is going to be highest value for this large group of people who have a variety of needs and wants and desires in a changing competitive environment, by the way. You have to make that decision, and then you have to spend a bunch of time doing discovery, deciding what to build, building that thing, starting to test it. And all the time, you can't go back and revisit that original assumption of, was this the right opportunity to pick? And so there's all this risk introduced, both in how I've picked that opportunity. Did I pick the right one? And then also, is this solution the right one? And so you might have picked the best opportunity, but you built the wrong solution. Or like you just didn't get the solution to a place where it is actually viable. This happens all the time. We're like, oh, we should go solve that problem. And then we try to solve it and we're like, oh, it's harder than we thought. And so what I think is really cool about being in this like rapid prototype era is that you can hedge your bets a lot more. And so you can say, instead of saying we think this is the number one most compelling opportunity for us to build in, and we think this is the number one most compelling solution for us to build, you can say, we're going to pick these 3 or 4, and we're going to design solutions like working prototypes for 3 or 4 different theories of the case for each of those, for what people really want. And then we're going to go test all of those. And so you can get like way further in just the like, before you have to make a really expensive decision than you've ever been able to get before. And then you can like trade off, instead of trading off against docs that you're looking at, you're trading off against informed opinions about how people are using these products that you built. And I think that is increasingly going to become a really key part of like how you think about what a product manager is good at, is less of like, how are they making the right bet and how are they doing all the analysis to say, I'm super confident that we should be going all in on photo sharing. And also I'm super confident in this direction of doing that. And more in, okay, we've got like X amount of resources. Like, here are the most compelling bets we can place across this whole portfolio. And then your chances of winning just go up radically from that.
So is it like in the quote unquote old world, you do 6-month roadmap reviews, or you get 6-month roadmap locked in, everyone just be executing, and then you do like quarterly or monthly business reviews that are like check-ins on that, and then product reviews and some more frequent cadence just to see how things are going? If that's the old way, would the new way be like, is there still room for a 6-month roadmap in a world where teams are working the way that you're describing? And is the concept of a roadmap still something that you think will exist? Or is it like, are we moving just into a world of more like portfolios of bets that are running at all the times? And like, you're just your job as a manager is to monitor the learnings and performance of the portfolio?
You're asking the tough questions. I don't know. Again, like, you need to be able to make promises. It depends on the company, right? Like, you might have customers who are demanding things from you and they need to have commitments for what you're going to do. And they're not going to think it's cute when in 6 months you're like, oh, actually we built 17 versions of this and we didn't like the one we made for you, so we're not going to ship it. I think if you were to like abstract out the sort of like broader organizational reasons to have a roadmap, then sure. I don't know if those are going to go away. Maybe like we will just all become enlightened and recognize that we're like, the quality of product is going to get better and better. And so we can live with that. And by we, the customers and the marketing teams and the sales teams and all the people who need these commitments and actually need this. But to me, it's the same thing people would say about Agile, is like, it's all fun and games until people need a commitment, and they need a commitment that's 6 months out. And if you don't want to give it to them, like, you're not going to get the contract, and then nobody's going to be there to build the thing that you were so excited about your Agile development process for. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think the interesting dots that I was connecting is back to your question, Ben, of what are PMs going to be incentivized to do? I think in this new world, if you think about like PM work outside of the house work versus inside of the house work, like outside of the house work being like talking to customers, looking at what the competition is doing, look at where the market is going, versus inside of the house, like getting stakeholders aligned and getting your roadmap approved and getting buy-in for your projects. In a world where you can create designs and build things a lot faster, I actually think people are incentivized to spend more time outside of the house, because that's actually where you get that alpha. And if you have enough data, enough conviction, then the rest is going to be easier. So I think that's maybe like another way to think about it, that almost spending more, just making more time to talk to customers, think about strategy, think about where the market's going. I think that seems like a good use of time.
And I think the PMs will do that if they're properly incentivized to do it, and it gets rewarded the same way it gets, like, PMs, I think, in a lot of the companies that I've seen and people that I know of are in, whether it's whether I agree with it or not is irrelevant to the point I'm making, which is that I think there still is this perception that PMs are often increasing velocity. We're going to move faster. We're going to like ship more products. We're going to deliver on more roadmap items. Like there still, I think, is this preconceived notion from a lot of people that are not PMs and not product leaders that are cross-functional partners of what the role of product is. I think some functions are getting increasingly aligned with the idea that PMs should be focused more on understanding the customer, and that's like at a premium. But I think not everyone's there yet. And I think that when performance reviews come around, I'm sure this is super company dependent and it's going to be different in every company. But I would love to see the performance criteria against which PMs are evaluated start really spiking on what you're talking about, Marc. Because I do think that in a world where it's so easy to build, and we haven't even talked at all about the leverage engineers themselves are going to be getting out of these tools, which is a separate conversation. But in a world where like your entire engineering team is like super charged up on like Cursor and like they could build everything way faster, and the Cursor tools themselves and Claude and all the models that power the engineering team are getting better. Let's also assume you have a hyper competent CTO or VP of engineering that can get the whole team to adopt and embrace these tools. And then your design team is like using all the latest and greatest tools to create the prototypes and control the front end experience. And let's assume QA is automated to the degree that it's possible. Then yeah, like there's a world where the PMs have potentially worked themselves out of the product development process and have really become, it's interesting because I don't know if we have a term for it, because the CEO of the product is still maybe the best directional idea that encapsulates the role of the PM. If you think about what a CEO of a startup does, is they're out there selling all the time, right? Like they're selling and they're talking to customers and building customer empathy. And I think that is where the product function, I think, should head and will head. But Hilary, I'm curious to get your reactions to that, and then we could start wrapping up because I know.
Yeah, I mean, I was in product marketing before I was in product management, and so like I hear you say that, and I'm like, that it sounds like that to me is where like a lot of there's going to be more of that expected on the product side and moving into marketing, just as much as all of these things are starting to kind of merge. I also think like part of why I am so increasingly bullish on this like just invest in your superpower type rhetoric is because historically, like the lines between teams have been so skill based. And as skills become democratized through a lot of these tools, like they're like, what are the natural boundaries that are going to exist when those like artificial skill based boundaries fall away? And it's going to be like what you're really good at, right? Like people are just going to stick you at the thing that you have an unfair advantage at. And the perfect team is not going to be like, oh, this role that, you know, everyone's like, oh, well, is it design engineers or is this role becoming this? It doesn't matter. None of this matters. What matters is you want like whatever the company needs to do, you want the best person who can do that in that spot to do it, working with people who complement them, right? And who are also uniquely good at these other things. And it could be the whatever permutation of those different skills can fall across those people in whatever way. Like it truly doesn't matter. And I do think it's when I'm trying to hire like a good product team, I'm looking across my entire team and I'm thinking, what are the gaps across the team? What are the spikes across the team? Like, I'm not interested in hiring a bunch of clones of each other. I'm interested in hiring people who complement each other in really helpful ways and making sure that we have that spread of like spikiness across a lot of different areas. And I think that's going to be increasingly how we think about teams, like cross-functional teams and like a product development team in general, is whatever you want to call the role, like you're going to recognize that you need somebody who's just really understands the customer. You're going to need somebody who can like really turn that into a compelling experience. And you're going to need somebody who can build that. And like where those lines are drawn is pretty arbitrary. And I think we'll just start to become like much more about how you pitch yourself, right? And what you bring to those working groups. And it'll be more like if you just stick people in a room, the way people start to naturally assume roles, like I think work is going to look more and more like that.
I love that. What the thing I was just picturing as you're talking is if I think traditional way of thinking about PM hiring is like I have a archetype of what a great PM looks like in my head, and I'm just going to hire, like if I have 5 openings on my team, I'm just going to hire 5 of those. And I think what I was hearing from you is think a much more like nuanced and I think pragmatic way, which is look, like the business needs are going to evolve. There's going to be like platform work that comes up. There's going to be growthy kind of work that comes up. There's going to be like super deep strategic product work that comes up that requires deep understanding of customer empathy and the product sense. So you almost want to have a portfolio of product managers on your team that you can like allocate, and then ideally their superpowers line up with those business needs that come up in their zones of genius. And I think it's a really refreshing way of thinking about like how you build your team. And I love that.
And it's, by the way, why I've always been very anti, like, what do you call the rubrics that you do people's performance on? What are those things called?
Career ladders.
Yeah. And it's like, here are like the attributes that matter, and you have to be like progressing at all of them. Because I'm like, the worst thing in the world is like getting the kind of coaching that just is trying to turn everyone into average at all of those things. And the last thing I ever want is like a bunch of people who are average at all of the skills we need. And
like
so
you don't want standardized tests for PMs at your company.
Exactly. Yeah. And so when I have a little tool that I use when I'm doing like having not like a formal assessment because I've got to use the process, but when I'm just having these conversations on my own, like I've got a little tool I use where I have all the attributes I care about, and I kind of score the PMs on each of them, and they can see their little chart. Like, you know, it's like a video game where you get your, what are those things called? Like your skills. And you can see, like, it's important to know where that average line is because you want the average line to be like putting you at the high performer level. But it's important that it's not everything at that line, right? It's better to have one or two things that are way up here. And then you got a couple stuff that's like a little bit down below, but again, not in the problem zone. And so I say to people, like, there's a million ways to be an excellent PM. And so we're here to figure out the ways that you are going to be an excellent PM at this company in this role. And I think that's like very much how I think about like how the future of high performing teams is going to work. And it is just going to be like, how do you get people who have super complementary skill sets that are really good at all of them and really good at working together?
I love it. Let's start wrapping up. Just as a quick aside, I did have coffee with one of the PMs on your team who I got introduced to through a mutual friend. He said you're hands down the best manager he's ever had, and he would gladly follow you to another company if you ever leave. So I think these things that Hilary's talking about work really well. So, okay, in closing, we have two quick questions for you. One is, where can people learn a bit more about what you're thinking about and doing these days, and how can they potentially be helpful to you?
Cool. Probably best place is my newsletter. So hils.substack.com, hils.substack.com. I write just about whatever's on my mind. So if you like hearing whatever's on my mind, go follow me there. And then I also teach a Maven class and on using AI to be a supermanager. And so it's a lot of stuff we talked about here, like the AI side of things, but also like just the management and being somebody who really brings out the best in their team and gets their team to do really good work and also have fun doing it and enjoy doing it. So you can find me on Maven, and I have another cohort opening up in July. So I would love to see some of your listeners there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time. This was a great conversation.
Yeah. Thank you all for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much.